Of note, however, is the dismissal by both Lamola and President Cyril Ramaphosa of suggestions that the absence of U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio signaled a U.S. boycott of the gathering. There is also Nigeria's bid for a table at the G20 on the sidelines. To explore the key takeaways from this historic meeting and what they mean for Africa's future, I have two guests. The first is Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast. He's a political analyst. He joins us from Johannesburg, South Africa. We also have Professor Thokozani Simelane. I hope I got that well. Professor of Practice, Human Sciences Research Council, also from Johannesburg. Thank you very much for joining us. I just wanted to confirm your...
Thank you.
Oh, great. So let's begin with this historic meeting that we hear about. Beyond it being the first foreign ministers meeting under South Africa's G20 presidency, what's the broader significance of this event?
I think, firstly, greetings to your viewers and greetings to you. It's really an honor and a pleasure for us to share our views with the audience across the continent and in Nigeria in particular. The significance of this gathering and the event is very huge for the continent itself, because no one ever dreamt that the continent of Africa will one day be a host to the biggest economies in the world. And that on its own then means that Africa is moving forward and has taken a particular trajectory. I would rather say so.
All right. In the summary of key takeaways from the meeting, the chair reaffirmed the role of the G20 as the premier forum for international economic cooperation. Is this really the case? If yes, what does it mean for Africa beyond the glamour of having these world powers?
Certainly, in echoing the words of Minister Lamola and the importance of the event that has recently taken place, the entire G20 presents continents with an opportunity to engage directly with the biggest economies in the world. And for that on its own, it means that Africa is standing an opportunity to express its aspirations, which it has been expressing for so many years, actually, that Africa would like to play a significant role in the economies of the world. To an extent that Africa developed a phrase which said that African solutions for African problems. So with this gathering and the proximity of the continent to the bigger economies, it is a moment for Africa to state it loud that it is indeed an opportunity for Africa, and this is what Africa would like to see as it is contextualized within the Agenda 2063.
Okay, so some of my questions in this opening segment will come from the chair's summary of events, the entire meeting. There were concerns expressed about the slow progress being made in the achievement of the SDGs of the 2030 agenda. And we know that the meeting stressed the need for urgent action to accelerate efforts and reaffirm the G20's strong commitment to the SDGs. What actions do you think is being described here, and how really can the G20 support?
The concerns around the Agenda 2063 as conceptualized within the Sustainable Development Goals is a reality, of course. But Africa needs to take that and understand it into the context of the realities which the world is facing. There are quite a number of issues and the priorities that are taking place, which of course somewhere somehow makes not all countries to be as committed to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals as it should have been. Among these are the conflicts and the wars that are ravaging across the world, in as much as also the financial situations, the financial realities which many countries are facing. And these are more significant or reality in the continent where the persistent conflicts have taken away the attention and also the pulling together of resources to fulfill or to meet some of the Sustainable Development Goals, if not all of them. Now, this is actually a moment, the G20 provides a moment of developing the priorities as well as also determining and developing the roadmap for achieving most of the Sustainable Development Goals. It may not be all of them. So I hope and I believe that at the end of the G20 meetings, with the pronunciation of what the G20 countries would like to see, and I believe then that Africa needs to spell it out, its desires and the aspirations of how it views the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, I was a bit scared there when you talked about G20 and roadmaps, but your closing remarks did confirm it is Africa setting the agenda and stating what exactly it wants. But there is the part about the G20's support. How will that be in practical terms? Because we talk a lot about the power that this G20 holds, and the fact that South Africa has the presidency at the moment, widens the scope of opportunities for the continent. So talk in specifics, what can you tell us of how the G20 can support the SDG goals?
At the moment, I think, let me rather share with the audience that the activity that has recently taken place is actually the first of the activities that are going to take place throughout the year. And then these activities are being led by the working groups, which has been developed. And then these working groups are overseen by various ministries. So I can rather say that if we can say or preempt that the G20 is going or is expected to make a particular contribution to a particular set of Sustainable Development Goals, that will be premature. What I think is important for now, with the opening of the G20 through the event that has taken place, is for Africa now to take this event very seriously and become proactive in terms of expressing and assisting South Africa as to what is it that the continent would like to see happening. And I'm sure that through the Africa Union, as a member of the G20, I mean, all the aspirations and the desires can then be put through or channeled through the AU down to the South Africa as the president of the G20 summit, in such a way that through this summit, the Africa will leave a legacy and a blueprint of what is it that it would like to see as far as the G20 engagement is concerned. I would rather say it's still premature for any conclusions or expectations to be made at this moment. Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes when we talk about the contributions of the AU and what Africa really wants and how we can speak with a collective voice, I am concerned because we have a climate that is distracted by wars, conflict, distrust, language barrier, and all of the complex structure that is the continent. How would the South African government, navigate this complex web to try and truly speak with one voice for the continent? The AU itself, last week we talked about setting priorities for the new leadership, and my guests were frankly disillusioned about the ability of the AU to be, as effective as it should be. because of how it is currently constituted. So talk us through some of the challenges you see for the South African presidency in the G20 in pushing the African goal, because you say Africa should take this seriously. How? On what climate, really?
You are certainly correct in observing that there are certain challenges that are facing the African Union, which makes it difficult for South Africa as the chair of this summit to claim that it is representing the voice of the continent. As we have indicated, one of the critical moments has been the elections that recently have been concluded, which I think through those elections, the AU may not have been so much active in terms of motivating and encouraging the member states to take this moment very seriously. That, I think, is one of the mishaps or the unfortunate realities which the continent is facing at this moment. However, again, despite the fact that the AU is a mouthpiece of the continent, I'm very certain that through the regional collaborations, here I'm talking about the regional economic blocs like SADC, the East African communities, the ECOWAS, there should have been some submissions of expressing the positions of these regional blocs, which can then be used as a build-up to the common consensus of the continent, as well as the expression, or which we can consider as the expressions of the continent, as to what is it that it would like to see and be addressed. Unfortunately, that's my observation. There hasn't been so much hype in the activities in the continent to demonstrate that the continent take this opportunity as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Africa and continent, or Africa at large, has been boasting itself that it is endowed in a variety of resources, and it wants to industrialize so that it can see the real benefits of those resources. And here is the opportunity. All the bigger industrial countries that has a capability to partner with the countries, with Africa at large, are here. And it seems as if we are sluggish in terms of expressing our views. And I think South Africa alone as a country may not be able to carry the bigger voice of the continent. So I can rather say that it's not all lost at the moment, because it's a build-up to the event that will happen in November. So the African continent needs really to take this opportunity to its hand and make sure that it becomes vocal as to what is it that it would like to see and what kind of engagement it would like to see taking place with the G20 countries.
You seem to think that there is some time, but it's neither here nor there. What do you think is the level of coordination for Africa's cooperation to speak with one voice? And what are the chances that this meeting will help in that regard? Are there more meetings that will be an offshoot of this foreign ministers meeting, do you think?
Certainly, on that question, I mean, I'm so fortunate that I'm serving in two committees. The one is a G20 scientific committee, and the other one is a committee on agriculture. And at the moment, I can say that there are issues of concern which we have developed that we then put together into documents, which we then put forward for discussions as a build-up to the actual G20 summit. And indeed, there are going to be a series of meetings and engagements that will happen throughout the end of the year. And it is in these meetings and events and activities that the positions which I'd rather consider to be the position for the African continent will then be distilled or consolidated and presented into a G20 meeting. So that's why I'm saying that there is still a chance, because the meeting that recently took place was a meeting for the ministers of international relations, I would say so. So actually that was an opening of the event. And then there are quite a number of meetings, bilateral meetings, parallel meetings that are going to take place. So Africa is not yet, or the voice of Africa is not yet gone, if we can seize this opportunity and move fast. Thank you.
Okay, I really love to see this coherence and coordination at the end of the day when you make your submission for consideration, and that some of these key submission will be filtered through for Africa to speak with one voice. We'll come back to the meeting summary and the issues that were raised as contained in the chair's summary of events, but I just want you to remind us of the importance of South Africa's G20 presidency for Africa's global influence, and how the continent can build on this momentum despite all our shortcomings.
Very interesting question, but to respond to it, I would rather say, how does Africa see itself in the global world order? Does it still see itself as a continent that still guided by the mentality of being colonized? Or the continent now says that here we are, the world needs to take into consideration our capabilities to play a significant role in global issues? For me, I would rather say this is a moment, a significant moment, where the African continent needs to stand up and say, this is what we want to see, and this is the role we would like to play in the global issues. And this is the moment for us to fully express our views. And indeed, you can see the trends of the changes in the continent that are taking place. There was a moment where we would say there is a scramble for Africa. That moment is gone, because the continent has taken some drastic positions to say, firstly, we appreciate the fact that we have some natural resources, and these natural resources are of a great significance in the industrial activities and the development that are taking place in the continent. Include us in beneficiating those minerals. That's the position which the continent has taken non-negotiably. And then secondly now, in variety of issues of geopolitical concern, and I think again, the continent has come forward to say, we are capable of resolving our own personal internal issues, and give us a chance to devise the solutions that are homemade. So all these, and looking at how Africa has been engaging with some members of the G20, here I can make an example of Africa engagement with China, Africa engagement with Russia, Africa engagement with France, and so on and so forth. You can see that there is a global shift in terms of what Africa would like to see, the role that it would like to play in the entire world. And that is a very interesting trend. But now, Africa needs to seize this opportunity and formulate an African position, which then it can request South Africa as a chair of this summit to say, on behalf of the continent, this is what we would like to see happen. Please talk for us as the chair of the summit. I would rather say so.
Okay. Of your singular submission, I've had like you're asking the question: how does Africa see itself, and do we still have that mentality of colonialism? I'm going to turn that question and ask you to give us your perspective of how you believe we have evolved in our thinking and in pushing for our rights. If you put that side by side with, calls for reparation, for instance, and that part of where you talk about the capability to resolve our own issues. You take that and then you look at some of the crises on the continent where the African Union have been accused of failing woefully, the crisis in the DRC, in Sudan. These are some of the issues that we keep talking about. So help us, based on what you know as somebody who is on the inside, have we really shifted our mentality enough to come up with stronger positions about what we want?
I think now this is my personal perspective and my personal positions. Africa needs to develop its philosophical position. Philosophical positions, I think, as a mechanism that can be guided by how, firstly, Africa engage with itself. I would say that is still a challenge in the sense that if the continent still perceives itself within the economic blocks, East Africa Community, ECOWAS, SADC, and so on, it will not then be able to express itself very eloquently and with one voice, as it should have been doing through the African Union. But this is a personal observation. We saw what happened recently with how the continent engaged with the conflict and what has been happening in the Eastern DRC. I mean, the continent rather said they would engage through the East African Community meeting and the SADC community meeting. That was not even chaired by the African Union for that matter, but it was just a club of coming together and trying to express the aspirations of how that issue must be resolved. I think we need to move away from that and be a continent that shares a particular philosophy of development, and as a continent that prioritizes itself and through the engagement with the world using the platform of the African Union in such a way that if there are events that are being shared by one particular country, those events shouldn't be perceived as the events that fall squarely on that particular country like South Africa. But South Africa needs to be seen as a vehicle of taking the aspirations and the desires of the continent. And countries like South Africa really needs to be seen as a representative rather than a country that is sharing the G20 summit. So for me, I'm lamenting that gap that's still existing in the continent, of which we do have the structures, of course, like the African Union, which we should have been using as a mouthpiece of the continent.
Okay, in conversations like this, we always go back to the AU and its position, and I also like to get as much perspective for the viewers on, where the AU stands currently. You talked about how Africa defines and engages with itself. Let us deviate a little and get your perspective on what the reforms are that are needed within the AU that will help us in this quest to speak with one voice. Or is it just the AU, or are there other considerations in this quest to speak with one voice on the global stage?
In trying to answer or address your question, I would like to draw the parallel with the European Union, for example, and also with China as the big conglomerate or the big country that engages with the 54 member countries of an African continent. I mean, if you look at how these regions, EU in particular, I mean, the European Union, they know what they want. They have mechanisms of engagement with the other regions of the world. But when you come to Africa, although we had a vision under the Agenda 2063, but when it comes to engagement, we tend to prioritize the aspirations of countries rather than to make the use of the multi-institutional body that we have in the name of the African Union, where then we can express our desires and the aspirations as a continent. So now, this is clearly reflected now that we have G20 in our continent. And for this G20, we see South Africa as if it's a country that is solely representing itself, whereas it's South Africa and the AU. And then these two, the country and the continental body, needs to work together in terms of, needs to work together to make sure that it takes forward the aspirations of the continent. So we have that, we still have that weakness of while we feel that we are cooperating at a continental level through the AU, realistically, when it comes to a country representing the interest of the country, whatever opportunity we get, we tend to push forward the aspirations of the country, which then end up competing with the aspirations of the continent.
Okay. I don't know, there is aspirations of countries instead of the continent. That stuck with me because that's a sentiment that was also shared, the elitist behavior when it comes to trying to build a unified front for the continent. And what comes to mind is, again, on the one hand, we're looking at, you can confirm this if I'm wrong, or I'm correct or wrong. The AU is looking to also be included in the G20. And we do know that Nigeria's foreign minister talked about the country's bid to join South Africa as a member of the G20. And then I'm thinking, with all that you know and what we've talked about so far, what are the chances that this presidency of South Africa will bring the benefits that that the opportunity holds, at least some quantifiable percentage for the continent?
Thank you for raising that question, which for me, it actually brings some feeling of sadness. Sadness in the sense that I would rather take the viewers a little bit back to the moment of the presidency of Obasanjo in Nigeria, and the presidency of Thabo Mbeki in South Africa, and the presidency of Abdoulaye Wade in Senegal. Those three presidents, gone they have been now, there was a moment where they worked together very jointly, and they uplifted the status of Africa's recognition in the entire world. I'm aware, or we can be aware, that fortunately the environment was created favorable through the Mr. Kofi Annan, being also heading the United Nations. Where have all that gone? Let's ask ourselves why we dropped the ball when these three presidents were taking Africa on their hands, and whenever they take an opportunity, they will speak together through one voice. If we sustained that, in actual fact, now there wouldn't be a question of South Africa must talk on behalf of Nigeria. It would have been known that where there is South Africa, there is Nigeria in, there is Senegal in, there is Ghana in, there is Egypt in. We dropped the ball somewhere, and we need to do a self-reflection and blame ourselves as the African countries as to why we dropped the ball in such a way that if one African country is in a global stage, another one will be expected to join in rather than to say, oh, my brother is there. Come, let's talk. And how best can we make use of this opportunity in such a way that our continent survive and our continent succeed? This has also, unfortunately, also played itself even in BRICS, where South Africa took a position. It was likely to be invited earlier than other African countries. And the other African countries took a backseat and said, South Africa is a member of BRICS, therefore we also need to be invited. Instead of us saying that if one of the African continent is in an opportune position, it must be assumed as if it represents all others. And then the African countries must gang behind that country to say, please create opportunities for all of us. So I would be very happy if we can adopt this perception and Nigeria be or assume that it will work very successfully. I don't want to say very closely, work very successfully with South Africa to also be part of G20, because Nigeria, as the biggest country in Africa, it has a very significant role to play in the entire development of the continent. If Nigeria is not there, it will mean that it may not be a success. Thank you.
Prof, it does go back to everything we've been talking about the continent speaking with one voice. If we can get that going, then we are almost winning the race. Originally, I fashioned that question as perhaps a building of a momentum of South Africa's presidency of the G20. But your explanation goes beyond building momentum, but consolidating on what we have currently, and that's South Africa's presidency. Let's go on a short break. When we come back, we'll be looking at some of the priorities that has been set out by South Africa for its G20 presidency and how it aligns with Africa's development goals. Don't go away. Very glad you're still with us. We're still looking at the first foreign ministers meeting under the leadership of the South Africa G20 presidency, and then we're looking at Africa's goals and priorities. Before we went on that break, I did say I was going to ask Professor Simelane, I hope I got that right, Simelane, how South Africa's priorities represent Africa's development goals. Let me take a few of them. Some of the priorities include strengthening disaster resilience, ensuring debt sustainability for low-income countries, mobilizing finance for a just energy transition, and harnessing critical minerals. Each of these are important, so I'm not going to lump them together. Prof, I'm going to ask you to speak on the priorities about strengthening disaster resilience.
As you have indicated, this is just a peak of the number of priorities which South Africa is working on with an intention to debate these priorities for the purpose of formulating the position for not only South Africa, but for the continent. The one that we have actually picked up is significant in the sense that South Africa, the continent itself, is now experiencing the realities of climate change. And South Africa does not have the strength / resilience to be able to recover from the disasters that are linked to climate change. And when I talk of disasters, I'm not only confining myself or ourselves to floodings. Climate change has a potential, as it has been demonstrated previously, of leading to the emergence of certain diseases, which Africa as a continent may not be strong enough to be able to deal with those diseases. So it's a variety of risk and shocks which are linked to the disasters. So for South Africa to pick that up, it's not only been through the experiences of the country. We do experience a lot of floodings here in South Africa too, but is to take a broader view as to persuade the G20 member states to take into considerations the significance or the importance of ensuring that it contribute to formulating the base of resilience for the continent. So it comes to that recognition, and in as much as I indicated that we are fully aware of the weakness of the continent in terms of dealing with the shocks, disasters that are linked with climate change.
The other thing is ensuring debt sustainability for low-income countries. Debt sustainability has been a conversation that has had lots of mixed reaction and people calling for more of internal funding and just staying away from debt if possible and looking at where we're going. We're talking about self-sustainability and how we can deal with our own problems. Your thoughts generally on that as a priority for South Africa's leadership?
A very interesting question. That's why you see me laughing. Because I want to draw a very interesting comparison. America has with the new president coming on board, and the president made it clear that it wants to make America great again, and it used tariffs as a way of mobilizing resources to make America great again. Africa is floating on resources, but Africa is afraid to take a stand to say, with these resources, mineral resources that are of a significance into the industries as well as the economies of the world, but we haven't, or we are afraid to say, with these resources, we would like to add so much as to generate the revenue that will be used to develop Africa. Why are we afraid? I don't know. That I wish one day we can take a stand to say, with the resources that we have from gold, platinum, whatever you mention them, add a certain amount.
Sorry to interject. Please don't lose your train of thought. But I'm just being naughty when I try to link that fear to maybe the remaining traces of that colonialism mentality that stays with us. Maybe if these parties leave, we might find ourselves in a dicey situation. Might that be a possible explanation of this fear, or more to do with the very divisive nature of the relationship within countries, within the continent?
Probably. Why can't AU at this time don't come up with the concept of developing the Continental Sovereign Wealth Fund, where countries with the mineral resources instead of those countries taking loans, but there will be a decision made to say the countries and the companies that are exploiting those resources should contribute to the Continental Sovereign Wealth Fund. What's wrong? What stopped the continent under the AU to take that decision or make that proposal?
Go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I wanted to put forward as a food for thought, really, because this is even a moment with this G20 where that concept should have been put forward or tested so that it can be debated more, because these are the multinational companies that have a presence in each and every country in the continent.
Okay, on the flip side of all this argument is some of the strides that Africa has made, and one major one that we keep getting reference is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Is there something that the South African presidency can do to strengthen regional integration like this that we already have, maybe get some support from the G20?
Certainly on that note, I think, as I indicated, that there are quite a number of working groups that have been developed, and then these working groups fall within different ministries. And for myself, in the Scientific Committee for the Science, Technology and Innovation, and another one for Agriculture. In all these working groups, there is a common thread, and the common thread is centered around the Continental Free Trade Area. And then I think it's one of the issues that are going to be debated extensively, and also a resolution might be taken as to how the G20 countries can engage with the African continent through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. But I might also say something significant in that regard, to say the Africa Continental Free Trade Area intends to make sure that the products that are produced in the African continent, they get market internally as well as also externally to the global market. If countries, the African countries, as the individual entities that participate within the African Continental Free Trade Area, are not expressive enough in terms of ensuring and wanting to see certain products that go beyond mineral resources as well as oil being taken to the global stage, we might miss an opportunity. So the opportunity is now, and I'm not sure if most or African countries have taken stocks of the products which they would like or would like to be seen being promoted through the G20 agreement. I doubt, but we just see and look at it as an Africa Continental Free Trade Area as a concept. And if we maintain that, we might lose an opportunity.
Underneath your concerns, I sense some measure of optimism on South Africa's ability to actually, stand out during their time as at the G20. But speaking more broadly, how do you think it will impact Africa's voice in international decision making generally? Because we agree it's a milestone, it's a momentum, it's historic, but the bigger picture, will their performance impede or improve our voice in international decision making?
The event itself will be a history, as we have all agreed. It's a first of its kind to take place in the continent. The continent has never dreamt of the fact that it can directly engage with the global superpowers. And here is an opportunity. And this is going to leave the footprints of what the continent expressed to the G20 through, of course, the discussions or the conclusions that are going to be taken and consolidated into a document that will then be expressed as the conclusions of the G20. That on its own will leave the legacy that during the G20 summit, which was held in South Africa, the continent expressed this. And of course, the expressions on a piece of paper might remain the expressions on a piece of paper without being seen any implementation. It lies on the continent itself that now it has got this opportunity to contribute to the global issues. What kind of mechanisms and programs that it develops to make sure that it capitalizes on this opportunity and the momentum which needs to be built moving forward from the summit. Because the summit is an event. The most important thing are the activities that are going to be developed and implemented as a way of operationalizing the declarations that are going to be made. And let us hope and cross our fingers that under the African Union, something is going to happen, as well as also at a bilateral level, country level. The continent will strengthen its capabilities and engagement to make sure that this opportunity is not missed.
I hear you, Prof. It's important that we rally round. Sometimes when we talk about issues like this, we don't look at the role of citizens and other institutions in helping push the agenda that we want. South Africa, like you rightly mentioned, is a country, and once a brother is there, we should have optimism that they can deliver. So as we wrap up, I would like to hear what your call to action would be for African leaders, citizens, and institutions, perhaps, as South Africa takes on this responsibility to help them and give them the needed push to make us all proud?
Putting me on a corner, but I will talk not only on behalf of the leaders, but on behalf of our generations. Because the future for Africa is on our hands. The leaders have done their part. They've gave us democracies of different types, and now they are giving us an opportunity even to talk on behalf of the G20. I would rather say that to a generation of ourselves, here is the chance. Let us make sure that we craft the programs, we craft the trajectory which the continent must take, and also the roles which the African continent needs to play through us as the generations of the African continent. No one, nobody will take the African continent forward on our behalf. This is our land. We were born here. We will die here. That's the only words that I can say. Thank you.
Professor Thokozani Simelane, thank you so much for your contributions tonight.